Well, let's stick with the citizenship issue, and the ongoing crisis has prompted questions about how the ban in the Constitution on dual citizens sitting in our parliament is impacting the political aspirations of Australian immigrants. Liberal MP Craig Laundy said that the government should consider measures to abolish Section 44.
If you are a dual citizen, that is something you should celebrate, not something you should need to renounce to be a member of federal parliament. That's the part that has been greatly missed and overlooked here, and the part that we need to look at how we can change, whether it's a referendum, whether it's something else.
That's Liberal MP Craig Laundy, who represents one of our most multicultural electorates. So what do leaders of our multicultural community think about this citizenship saga? Peter Doukas is Senior Deputy Chair of the Federation of Ethnic Communities Council of Australia, or FECCA, and Stepan Kurkasharian is the Foundation Head of SBS Radio. He went on to be the Head of the Ethnic Affairs Commission in New South Wales and has served as President and CEO of the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Board. Both men join me in the breakfast studio. Peter, Stepan, welcome to RM Breakfast.
Good to be with you.
Stepan, is Section 44 stopping multicultural Australians from entering politics? Is it unfair on that front?
I think multiculturalism and multicultural Australia should not be associated with this issue. This issue is about people adhering to the Constitution, to the letter of the law. In terms of citizenship, I think that there is a very clear distinction between what is citizenship and what is someone's ethnic or cultural heritage. Citizenship, at the end of the day, is a legal status. It is a contract between an individual and a state. And it's not something that you pick up and put in your pocket. It's something that bestows not only privileges on you, but if you're a citizen of a country, you also have responsibilities towards that state. Therefore, it is not something that we can say, look, this is about a multicultural nation which has to come to terms with it and therefore allow dual citizenship. The two are two different things.
But is it a big thing to ask somebody to renounce the citizenship of their country of birth or their country of heritage if that's a significant part of their identity? Is that a big step to ask someone to renounce that so they can maintain this citizenship and represent, be a representative of the parliament, not too big a price?
Well, two things. Someone's identity is not that person's citizenship per se. Identity is what the person's heritage is, what their culture is. Secondly, let's not forget that that person, someone like me, has left behind their childhood friends, has left behind their relatives, everything that they grew up in, and decided to come to Australia to start a new life because they love Australia and they know that Australia gives them something that they don't have back home. And therefore, they have made that decision to leave a lot of things behind. And therefore, legally being bound to their past does not mean that if they disassociate from that legal binding, does not mean that they're disassociating themselves from their past and their feelings.
Peter Doukas, do you agree with that having to renounce your citizenship, that doesn't change your sense of who you are, your identity, your relationship with your country of birth, if that's the situation?
Well, we're not talking about renouncing citizenship to be part of the Australian multicultural story.
No.
We're talking about
to be part of the parliament.
To be a member of parliament is a very different calling than simply to be an Australian citizen. No one's debating the ability of somebody to be a dual citizen and to be a productive member of the Australian society.
Yeah, so what we're asking here, is Section 44 too high a price to pay? Is it discouraging people from diverse backgrounds entering politics? What do you think?
Well, I don't believe so, because there is an understanding now. There is a clear law. The High Court's made a clear ruling about it. I'm more interested in where money comes from in the Australian Parliament and the funding of political parties. I find that that's a much more serious issue for us to contend with than people's citizenship. The law as it stands is that dual citizens are ineligible to stand for Australian Parliament. I don't believe that affects Australian multiculturalism at all. I think someone's cultural identity and ethnic identity is something fundamentally separate to their citizenship. As it is now, dual citizens are unable to be members of the Australian Parliament. And should the law change to allow an aspect of dual citizenship, I don't think the arguments are multicultural ones that would allow that.
What do you mean? Should the law change to allow an aspect of dual citizenship?
Well, what we've seen in this in this recent matter that's emerged in the Australian Parliament is people, members of Parliament, mostly without their knowledge, being ruled ineligible. So someone like me, born in Australia, to parents who were born in Australia, that went to the effort of actually becoming a Greek citizen, would have to consciously then unwind that to be eligible to stand for the Australian Parliament. And I think that's fair enough. Were the law to change, however, were I to have inherited my Greek citizenship without my knowledge, I think that's really the question here that's got to be considered.
Is that a bridge too far?
Well, I think so.
What do you think about that, Stefan? Those who have it conferred upon them rather than go seeking it. Is that a different situation? Should we try and affect the Constitution, Section 44, though that's hard to do, or something less than that to ensure that changes, that doesn't rule people out?
Well, someone who is standing for Parliament has got aspirations, and justifiable, I guess, aspirations of becoming one of the people who will rule and contribute to the destination and the future of this country, to make laws which affect the whole future of Australia. I don't think it is a big price to say to that person, look, if you're not sure of where you stand, just write a letter and say you're denouncing that citizenship if you possibly have it. Now, there's another issue here which we cannot overlook, and it's a very practical and realistic issue. Say someone who has dual citizenship and is a citizen also of North Korea, and we are almost on the verge of entering into a conflict situation, and say that person was the Minister for Defence. Where would that person stand?
So that would be an unacceptable confusion of allegiances.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's
Absolutely.
obviously what the High Court proposed. I mean, that's why it proposed this, because it is about allegiances, and that's why when the Prime Minister says he doesn't think the Australian people would be in favour of people with dual citizen being in the Parliament, it is about allegiances. Peter, what do you think about that?
And those allegiances stem much further than just the simple question of defence. I mean, this is the Australian Parliament that makes laws for the Australian people. We have diplomats that deal with other countries. Adding known dual citizens to the Australian Parliament would simply add confusion. The question is not a multicultural one, though. It's not one. I mean, we're a country in which 1 in 4 people are born overseas, and another 1 in 4 have got at least one parent born overseas.
Yeah, that's a lot of people potentially ruled out unless they do something about that.
Well, not necessarily. I don't consider them ruled out. I think the question of serving in the Australian Parliament is one of significance, and for that reason, the requirements of the Constitution, in my view, are appropriate.
And can I just, Stefan raises a key point about the allegiances, and there's the North Korea case is an obvious one. There might be others that are obvious, less obvious than we talk about a dual citizen of New Zealand, for instance, or even Britain, for instance, because I think generally most of us understand that there's not that's not unlikely to present a conflict of allegiance. But in your case, Peter, you chose to go seeking citizenship of Greece. Why did you do that? And what does that say about the allegiance you feel to Australia and to Greece? For instance, if you wanted to enter Parliament, would you feel like you could fully represent Australia given the allegiance you sought to Greece?
My allegiance is to Australia. I grew up in this country. I consider myself completely Australian. I sought Greek and European citizenship because of family connections there and property connections there. Were I to run for the Australian Parliament, I would happily relinquish Greek citizenship for that purpose. I don't think the question of allegiance with respect to citizenship on its own comes up at all. Multicultural communities contribute to Australian society by being themselves effectively, by growing their own culture, by furthering their own, their own history in Australia.
And that's your position, Stefan. That's basically where you started this debate. But do you think that this conversation, but do you think the debate we're having now around this, do you think there's a danger of sending a negative message? I think that's what Craig Laundy was getting at, as much as perhaps looking at changing the Constitution, that the national conversation could be in danger of alienating or making multicultural Australians feel uncomfortable?
Look, I think one has to be realistic about this. And one must not underestimate the intelligence of people. people do realise that
Not that sensitive.
Well, people do realise that we're talking about maybe 400 or 500 people out of 22, 23 million people, and we're talking about people who want to put their hands up and say, I want to be one of those people who control the future of Australia. That's what we're talking about. And the bottom line is, if you want to control the future of my country, then you have to have absolute allegiance, at least on paper, absolute allegiance to this country. And that's the bottom line.
Stepan, Peter? Peter, did you want to say
Well,
something?
I totally agree with Stepan. And on the question of British subjects, for example, we're about to enter into free trade negotiations with them. How would it be if there were disclosed British subjects who were members of the Australian Parliament? This is a question of allegiance to the country that you are serving in the context of political representation, and I think it's absolutely appropriate that the Constitution is upheld.
Stepan, Peter, thank you very much for joining us on Breakfast.
Pleasure.
Peter Doukas is Senior Deputy Chair of FECA, the Federation of Ethnic Communities Council of Australia, and Stepan Kurkasharian was the Foundation Head of SBS Radio a long time ago, has since held positions as the Head of the New South Wales Ethnic Affairs Commission and also with the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Board.